We are looking at the largest wooden construction in the world. It is the Ark, or a replica of it, of Noah's Ark, being built by certain people to try to show an example of what the Bible is saying about what Noah and his family had. Could it have been built by one family? And yet it's the same dimensions. We're wondering about it. It's in the construction period right now. We can see that it is being built. And when it is going to be, many people come and see what is an example of what it appears in the Bible to have been the story of the Great Flood.
This YouTube video is really meant to be more than what the authors of the building and its constructors are intending. They're conservative Christian people who want to show you what happened historically and showing you it in the sense of Genesis chapters 5 to 9 as being sort of a historic fact. Well, there is a fact connected to it, and that is there was a great flood, and there was a lot of primitive stories and epics about that flood. That much we know. But now the salvation of a people and having it explained as one family and having them gather up two of all these species that are on the earth, this is a little bit different from what the theology is, that a loving God is protecting people, and that those that are not wanting to be saved in some fashion, or at least are not making any effort at it, they're going to be lost in some kind of a flood, a secular flood that surrounds the world. Now that's a theology of it. When you match that with a history, well, it can become somewhat complex. It's like saying in the Bible, God is the rock. Well, if you say God is the rock, you'd say, well, what kind of rock? Well, you mean that God is the firm, sound, solid foundation of our lives. It's the basic on which we live. That's what we mean. We don't mean he's a chunk of rock, because the next person would say, but I know some rocks that will sort of scatter and move about through a hammer very easily, and that they're not solid. So that's true. And we don't want to say too much about it as being for what the metaphor is. Well, here too, we've got to see that this is more than just a story of someone building a building. And yet this is what is being presented, and so it can be confusing, especially for young people. And therefore, a teacher is asked, can you say something more for young people? And do they have to think of this in terms of Santa Claus coming down the chimney and sort of then laughing about the whole thing? Or can they do something more? Can they find here a serious story that's not what is being shown in this massive building that is before us? And that brings us to a problem. We can sometimes do these videotapes in a positive way with a slight negative beginning, but here the negativity of it stands out and colors it very heavily. Why are they building this building in the first place? So as we look a little deeper, we can say there is a story that can be mistaken. It really started in the last few centuries, not really a lot longer or way back in the 2,000-year history, just in the last 2 centuries at most, when suddenly people began to see history as something not only entertaining, but bonded very closely to what the Bible is saying in very specifics, literal ways of seeing it. And so an Anglican Archbishop of Ireland, back in James Osler, back in the 17th century, he says, he did his calculations in whatever way we don't know exactly, but they're there. And he says, October 23rd, 4004 BC. That's when the world started. Not just Earth, but world. And then That is part of what is explained by people who are, in a literal sense, always gluing themselves to the Bible as though it's the instrument of history alone. Yes, there was an epic flood, but to say that one family gathered all the species. We take a look at this building. It took a couple hundred people to build it, or to build it now using concrete, which they never had then, and also doing a lot of things to make it stand up. Well, it's supposed to last more than 40 days, yes, but putting in all the species, believe me, there are almost a million of them now. They couldn't fit into the building 10 times that size. They couldn't fit into one. And then the waste material that was connected over those 40 days and feeding them. Think of that. A million species. They had maybe, at most, if we could pile these in, the replica, as we will be seeing in a little while, they could get a couple of hundred maybe. But what about this? Is this story real in its fashion in which it's done historically? Or is it telling us a theological message? We do not want young people to be belittled by it. We do not want them to be confused by it. We want them to see in a very serious way that using past types of epic stories and then blending this in, a deeper theological story is being told. First of all, we got to remember this isn't a hidden place way out in the middle of nowhere. This can be seen, as we can see in these photos. One of these can be seen from the Interstate 75, the second most traveled highway in America, and some would say in the world. So it's right there for the world to see. Nobody can deny that. But is it being good to Kentucky, which has its own scenic treasures, such things as Mammoth Cave or the Red River Gorge? These are what people are coming to see from other parts of America. Is it well situated? Yes, it is. It's right there, not only near the highway, but it's in an area of the country where half of the American public, and that also includes the Canadians, can come within a 1 day's trip. And not all the parts of the United States can say that. In fact, this is one of the most ideal spots for what is this ark to be located. And so its location near a highway, well, it's being done very seriously. But what is the message? Now we can see at times public transportation coming here, but not just public, but public schools transportation, bringing kids. And that bothers us. Isn't it presenting a certain type of Christianity, which is not supposed to be mentioned or taught is what this is really being done by the different trips that they take. It's being taught to the American kids, and by using public highways and also using public transportation to do it. And so we begin to ask the question, what is happening here? And we say that the story is being told to young people who will go on to college and find out that the dinosaurs could not have been captured and put in there. Dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. And that was before the time of Noah, quite a bit. And here they will have a cage in which dinosaurs are present. Believe me, this is make-believe. It is something that we do not want our kids to be thinking about as though 65 million years was compressed. And from some miracle or something, they went into Noah's ark too. So we look a little deeper and say, shouldn't we really be finding something that's a little bit more to do with the reality of the world we live in? And so we say, what about the fact that we have climate change today, which is a major problem and needs solving? Is it even mentioned? Is there any indication that this is not meant for people like this, but they are meaning it for those who deny climate change, deny evolution, deny the beauty of what God has done when the earth was created, and the big before that, the great Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago, long before the 4000 BC that this one person thought was the beginning of the world. See, there's a great difference, and this great difference is really being magnified by the way in which you interpret the building before us. This building is trying to say, they are all wrong. This thing that existed, and existed in a certain way, in the year 2016, 17, this building is a replica of what actually existed, in which our forefathers, Noah, his family, were living in, and all the rest were destroyed. Now, that story is not theological. It's not really biblical. It's what some people believe in their own special way. Well, that's a story in itself. The whole story of evolution, it's another point for a videotape. But let's go to the positive aspects of the ark as it stands today. We do not want to see it destroyed or damaged in any way, but rather used in such a sense that the theological truth of the Noah story could be exemplified. Why not? That's what it's meant to be in the first place. So how would you do it? Are you just interested in the building itself? Or do you want to make the building a background, like it was, for God's revelation to the people? Here was a covenant to the whole of the earth. And that was shown in the rainbow. Let's think about taking this, which is a beautiful building in itself, and it's on a highway, which is one of the most traveled in America and the world, and it is near enough to such of half of the nation's North American population within an easy distance. Why don't we make this and include a light show? Because really, that's what the last of that episode talks about, is God's creation of a rainbow. It can be done as a light show over the ark itself, and it could be seen by people. You certainly can see the building from the highway. It can be seen by people either up close, allow them to come and see it, or it can be seen from a great distance. And let that show tell us the theological message that was really trying to be presented. That God saves the people. And those are saved in things like the ark. The ark is, of course, for many of us, the church, or the people of God, or individuals who are part of God's family in some fashion. And that they can live, and at the end of their struggles, which they do when the floods of the world comes upon them, at the end of the struggle, they can see the light of God's affirmation. And this can be done by light shows, and it's being done a lot of times with the brightness of the rainbow showing itself in some fashion over the ark. Now there's a completely different message, which is far closer to what the Bible is trying to do to us and tell us, than that this building actually floated around 3,000 years before Christ, and in some fashion had all the animals of the world in it. Well, that's a little ridiculous. Of course we are supposed to save the earth and save the animals in it, who are in mass extinction right at this time. And so part of our efforts are to be what the Noah, in the general sense, was meant, and that was to save those around us as well as ourselves. Why not make this the story? A climatic change that is occurring and is a catastrophe, and in its place a promise that if we work together with each other and work with the grace of God, we can save our earth. Now that's placing a positive aspect to the building itself and not trying to see it in some type of false historic sense. I think young people could get far more out of that. And when they go on to college then, and when they find out that, well, the world is more than 4,000 years old, it goes up into the millions and billions, and it's well calculated in many of that, from the radioactive waste that we find, and that is areas that we can look at more closely and find the age and how things can be calculated about the whole universe around us. And as we begin to sense that there is something far deeper, we can see that the theological message still holds. It doesn't get outdated by science. It's affirmed, and the two work together, and they both are part of the divine revelation of God. And so as we begin to see that, we see there's a positive aspect to it. So let's mull about that a little bit. Talk to the people who are finishing the building. Try to tell them that there is a greater message could be told with a little bit more money. Not much more, certainly not very much more, but it could be told in a deeper and more positive fashion.